Let us connect to Postgres database using SQL Workbench. In our case, Postgres is running as part of the Docker container, and the Docker container is running as part of Ubuntu VM provisioned from GCP. When it comes to this kind of setup, when we want to use SQL Workbench to connect to the database running as part of the Docker container on top of Ubuntu VM provisioned from some cloud provider, you need to ensure that required things are done at firewall level so that we will be able to connect to the service that is running as part of the servers provisioned from cloud platforms. When it comes to connecting to the databases using SQL Workbench, first we need to ensure that SQL Workbench is there. Once SQL Workbench is there, we have to ensure that JDBC driver is downloaded. We also need to get the database connectivity information. Then we have to configure the connection using SQL Workbench. With respect to our setup, we also need to ensure that the required ports are opened in firewall. Then we should be able to validate the connection and save the profile. If you have a remote database already, if you just want to connect to it directly using SQL Workbench, provided you have all the information, you can just go to this video and it will give you enough information to connect to database directly. This topic is primarily to connect to the database running as part of the Docker container, which is running on the VM provisioned from GCP, which can be related to even the other cloud platforms. In this case, we are trying to connect to Postgres database that is running as part of Docker container running in a Ubuntu 18.04 VM provisioned from GCP. We have published Postgres database port to port 5432 on Ubuntu 18.04. How to validate that? You can actually go to the Linux terminal here. Make sure you come out of the database if you are in the database by using /q like this. And then you can actually say telnet localhost 5432 and hit enter. If something is running on 5432 port, it will show up like this. Otherwise, it will just say connection refused or some sort of similar error. Now we can hit control closing square bracket and we can actually say quit to come out of the telnet. Now we can say docker stop itv_pg to ensure that this is stopped and we will not be able to telnet to 5432 because once the database in the container is stopped, we will not be able to telnet anymore. Now if I say telnet localhost 5432, it will fail. However, if I start by saying docker start here and then if I say telnet, it will work without any issue. You can see here. Let's review the command which we have used to actually create the container at the beginning so that you understand why we are able to listen on 5432 port when we use telnet when the database is running as part of the Docker container. If you go back to the command, which is nothing but docker container create, this is the command which we have used. Let us go to the create command. This is the create command. You can see that we have used -p 5432:5432. The default port on which Postgres typically runs is 5432. This is the port that is being used as part of the container, and this port is bound to the host port, which is nothing but 5432. If you understand basics of networking, to connect to a particular service which is running in the background all the time, we need to have port. Without port, we will not be able to connect. In this case, the container's port is published on host port 5432. If this port is different from 5432, you have to use that information to connect to the database in the container. The reason is, on top of the port, to connect to a database, we also need to have an IP address. However, the IP address of the Docker is private IP. It is not a public IP. Whereas, with respect to our Ubuntu VM, we have public IP also. Once we publish like this, once the firewalls are opened for this port, we should be able to use the Ubuntu IP to connect to the database that is running in the Docker container. Otherwise, you will not be able to. This is the reason why the 5432 on the host is listening to the port which is being used as part of the container. Without this, this will not work. The approach of connecting to the database that is running in the container using SQL Workbench on our system will never work if this is not taken care of. There might be a solution, but it will not be a straightforward solution. That being said, now you need to understand the IP address on which we can connect to. For that, you can go to the GCP console. In this case, I have closed. I just have to go to the console by saying Google Cloud Console here. Let me go here. Let me go to the dashboard. Yeah, I am in the dashboard already. Let me click on this and we should be able to see the virtual machines. The public IP for our system on which Ubuntu is running, where the Docker container is created, is nothing but this one. You can copy this. Now you can actually go to the terminal and you can say telnet this public IP and then 5432 and hit enter. You can see that on public IP it is able to listen using 5432 port, and hence we should be able to set up using that public IP. However, if I try to use telnet from my Mac, so telnet IP address and 5432, it will not work. Oh, it is working, which means I should be able to set up. I think I have opened this port for some other system, including all the servers in the account. That's why it is working. Otherwise, it will not work. If it doesn't work, I will show you what needs to be done. As it is working, now you can actually open the SQL Workbench. So it is under my applications. SQL Workbench is set up here. I can go here and then I can expand this. You can see there is a driver with respect to Postgres here. I will be setting up using this driver. I can run this to actually launch the SQL Workbench on the system. Now the SQL Workbench is launched and I should be able to add a new connection by right clicking on this. I think I can actually launch the new connection probably by clicking on this. No, there is something wrong. This interface is not correct. Let me close this and let me say file connect window. Yeah, this is correct. Let me right click. We have only new group here. There should be a menu here. It is not showing up that menu. Okay, I think I have to scroll down like this. Let me close this and let me say file new window. Yeah, this is what we have to use. Create a new connection profile. We can click on this and then we can give the name pg docker demo retail underscore db. The driver is nothing but Postgres driver. This is how the URL look like. As I have already downloaded and configured, it is working. Otherwise, it will throw an error. If you want to change, you can change it if it throws the error here. But as of now, it is connected and hence I can move on. So with respect to the URL, the host is nothing but the IP address, which is this one. Port is 5432 and the database is nothing but retail underscore db. Username is nothing but retail underscore user. Password is nothing but retail underscore password. Now you can say test. It should be successful. You can see that the message is connection to JDBC blah 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 is successful. If it fails, the main reason why it will fail is the port might have blocked as part of the firewalls. For that purpose, what you can do, you can go to your web console, expand this, go to network details. Earlier also we have opened up 8888 port when we set up the Python and Jupyter on that virtual machine. Similar to that, you can actually go here. As part of the firewall, you can edit the same firewall rule. This is the one which we have set up earlier. So we can actually click on this. We can say edit. Then we can actually say comma 5432 like this, and then you can save. This is how you can actually configure your firewall rule to actually ensure that you can connect to the database. If you don't do this, you will not be able to connect. If you are following my content to set up the VM and then Docker and then Jupyter Lab and then Postgres and so forth. Anyway, we are able to access it because there are other firewall rules which opened up the ports for me and hence it worked for me. In your case, it will not work. The way you can fix it is by going to the firewalls in Google Web Console. Now let's go back to the content. We have taken care about how to connect to the database using SQL Workbench without any issues. The test is also successful. Now it is time for us to connect. You can actually say OK here. It will take care of connecting to the database. In this case, when I closed the SQL Workbench earlier, I am in the Database Explorer. That's why it opened up using Database Explorer. In your case, you might just see a plain SQL window like this. You might not see the Database Explorer by default. I have been using SQL Workbench. That's why we end up in Database Explorer. Otherwise, it will show the screen like this. You should be able to run the queries. If you want to launch Database Explorer and look at the objects that are created, you can go to the tools and you can say show Database Explorer. Then it will actually show you this one. You can see all the 6 tables which we have created as part of the previous topic. You can also select the table and you should be able to see the columns of the table. You can also look at the sample data by clicking on data here. As I am in India and the VM is in US data center, because of the WAN or wide area network, it will take some time to actually establish the connection between SQL Workbench and the databases that are running in the container in the VM that is provisioned from GCP from US data center. So depending upon the bandwidth, it will take time. You just have to be patient when you use tools like SQL Workbench to connect to the remote databases which are set up in different countries than where you live. It is taking quite a bit of time. If it is taking too much of time, you can close this. Let me close it. Sometimes this will help fixing this unnecessary hanging issues. You can now double click this. It will take care of launching the SQL Workbench for us. we want to connect to this only, so we can say OK here. It is connected, and you should be able to see the objects very soon. Once the database objects are shown, you should be able to click on the object, and you should be able to see the attributes related to those objects, and also review the data by going to the appropriate tab. You can see the columns here. It got the response pretty fast this time. You can also click on data to review the data. It is just taking a bit of time, and you can see that data is loaded. This is how you should be able to use SQL Workbench to connect to the database that is running as part of the container that is running on Ubuntu VM provisioned from GCP. Now it is time for you to explore SQL Workbench features. It is worth spending some time in understanding this because using IDEs like this will improve your productivity on a regular basis.